So September saw the return of pound for pound king Floyd Money Mayweather, where he decisioned young pretender to the throne and WBA, WBC super welterweight champion Saul Canelo Alvarez. Floyd won the fight by majority decision. Everyone and their daughter thought Floyd won it by unanimous decision, apart from CJ Ross, who scored the fight 114-114, much to the despair of the crowd at the MGM, the press and the fans around the world. Floyd will march on to a defence of his title in May, possibly against Danny Swift Garcia, who tamed the beast Lucas Matisse in an undercard bout there at the MGM in Las Vegas. Hay versus Fury was postponed. It was scheduled for the end of September, but Hay sustained a cut over his left eye in sparring just 1 week before the fight, and that will now go ahead on February the 8th at the Phones For You Arena in Manchester. In October, we got things off to the start with a bang. Miguel Cotto returning to the ring, this time under the tutelage of Freddie Roach, beating overmatched Delvin Rodriguez in 3. We had Vladimir Klitschko beating Alexander Povetkin in Russia in an ugly fight, but he did the job in 12. And we had the debut of Olympic super heavyweight gold medalist Anthony Joshua looking very good, beating Emanuele Leo in the first round on a card from London on October the 5th. But now let's turn our attention to a real legend of the sport. Bernath, the executioner Hopkins, still going strong at 48 years old, still fighting young, undefeated opponents and winning world titles. In his last fight, he beat the unbeaten Tavoris Cloud for the IBF light heavyweight title and took the younger man to school. And now on October the 26th at the Boardwalk Hall in New Jersey, he takes on mandatory challenger Karo Murat from Germany. Clive, what do we expect to see from Hopkins in this fight?
If his last fight against Cloud is anything to go by, then I think we're going to see a very fast and well-prepared Hopkins again. I mean, he might be 48 years old, but in some ways, I think he's fighting better now than he was 10 years ago. His last 2 or 3 fights, he's beaten Jean Pascal, he's run Chad Dawson close, and these are younger fighters. And he's making them look stupid. So there's no reason on this level. I don't see why he can't do the same in his next fight.
He's just one of those guys that seems to defy his age. 48 years old. It's unbelievable that he's still beating these younger guys. Now, Murat is trained by a very legendary German coach called Uli Wegner. Wegner's trained a guy called Artur Abraham, we all maybe remember, former middleweight and super middleweight world champion. And they fight in a very similar style, that high guard, decent jab, like to go to the body, but a little bit one-paced and a little bit one-dimensional. Murat, in one of his biggest fights to date, fought Nathan Cleverly for the WBO light heavyweight title and came up short there, but gave Nathan a good fight, but was ultimately stopped late in the fight. He didn't really give us much to think that he could trouble Hopkins, did he, Clive?
Well, no. All due respect to him, he's not a Pascal. He's not a Cloud. He's not a Dawson. And as you say, he's a typical upright European fighter, and I think that's going to suit Hopkins. I think that's going to play right into his hands.
And Hopkins is very used to making mandatory defences. Let's not forget he had 20 title defences of his middleweight title. So amongst those 20 fights, he had a lot of mandatories. So he doesn't overlook opponents, and he gives every single opponent the respect that they deserve, and he makes sure that he doesn't slip up. Also, he's taken much younger fighters to school. We've seen the likes of Tavoris Cloud, obviously, but we had Jean Pascal, Chad Dawson in those fights. He made him look, not as good as he has done. But the big fight against Kelly Pavlik, he completely took out Pavlik's heart and took him to school. Now, Hopkins, when he does lose, he always loses very closely and in disputed fights, apart from maybe the Roy Jones fight. But in all his other losses, you could make a case for him winning. Look at the Joe Calzaghe fight, for example. He did, in many people's eyes, enough to win that fight. But I thought he was starting to feel the heat a bit and start to show his age a little bit and didn't like the pressure that Calzaghe was putting on him and the pace of the fight. So, Clive, what do you think Hopkins' keys to victory over Murat are?
Well, I think if Hopkins, as I said, I think Hopkins now is a far more experienced fighter than he was 10 years ago, obviously. So what he's lost in his prime physical condition, he makes up for with experience. And every time he gets into the ring now, it shows because of the way he's schooling these younger fighters. And if he fights the way he did against, as I said, if he fights the way he did against Cloud, then I can't see any reason why he cannot perform, be faster. He's obviously going to be more prepared like he was before. It always is. He's a consummate professional. And I would not be surprised if this time he puts on a show. And this time I think he stops his first fighter since 2004.
It's amazing to think it's been since 2004 since he stopped Oscar De La Hoya some 9 years ago. But what, if anything, does Murat have to do to beat Hopkins? Can he beat Hopkins?
Well, the thing you've seen with Hopkins in the past is that if you can unsettle him, take him out of his stride, don't allow him to pace the fight, that's when he starts to come unstuck. This is what Murat has to do. He has to unsettle him. He has to pull everything out of the bag for this fight. He has to fight out of his skin, and he has to make Hopkins fight for 12 rounds. If he can do that, I think he's in with a shout. But somehow, I just don't think he will. I think Hopkins is such a cagey fighter. As I said, so experienced. He'll be tying him up. He'll be playing all sorts of tricks on him. He'll be talking to him. You know, Murat will never have fought a fighter like Bernath Hopkins before.
And Hopkins is the king of sort of dictating the pace of a fight.
Exactly.
And fighting at his pace. Clive, going to put you on the spot a little bit here, but a prediction for the fight. How do you see it going?
Well, I can only see it going one way, as I say. I don't know what it is about Hopkins, but the more I see him fight, especially his last 2 or 3 fights, I'm getting more and more impressed with him. So for that, I just cannot see him losing. And as I say, I won't be surprised if he stops him in this fight.
He may not be the most exciting fighter in the world, but 48, still going strong, still fighting much younger guys. Hopkins, we should savour him while we can. He's still around, and he said, interestingly, Clive, that he'll fight anybody from 168 to 175. He said he won't fight until he's 50. Assuming he does do so, who would you like to see him in against?
Well, to be quite honest, I'd like to see him in against Cole Froch. I'd like to see Cole Froch, obviously if he beats Georgie Groves, even if he doesn't beat Groves, he can move up in weight. That's the fight I'd like to see, because I think it's a great fight for Hopkins. I think it's a great fight for Froch.
Personally, I think that the Froch fight may be a no-win fight situation for Karo Murat, because if he beats Hopkins, people are going to say he beat an old man, and if he loses to him, then he has lost to an old man, and that maybe tarnishes his legacy. I'd like to see Hopkins in against Kovalev, the puncher who came over here and stopped Nathan cleverly in his tracks. Okay, maybe looks a little bit crude, a little bit limited, but he could drag Hopkins into an exciting fight, Clive.
Well, no, because as I said, I don't think Hopkins, he doesn't need to fight someone that punches as hard as Kovalev.
It's a good point. It could be a dangerous fight for Hopkins.
Exactly. For me personally, I like to see the Karo Murat fight, because I don't agree with what you just said there. Because don't forget, Hopkins has beaten Cloud, he's run Chad Dawson close, he's beaten Jean Pascal in his last few fights. You know, he is still a very, very active fighter and a very capable fighter.
And one last thing, Clive, we heard recently that he said he's willing to go down to 160 to face the pound-for-pound king, Floyd Mayweather, for a fight in May. At his age, do you think that's a realistic opportunity for him?
No, I really don't. I don't know where that's come from, but I just don't think that can happen.
Well, that sums up our Hopkins versus Murat special. Many thanks to Clive for joining us in the studio and breaking that fight down and giving us his thoughts on that. And don't forget to click on our Gennady Golovkin versus Curtis Stevens preview. That will be coming up shortly on the channel as well. Don't forget to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel, comment on the video, and we'll see you next time.